Welcome to Syntax. On this Monday episode, we're going to be talking about Tailwind 4. This thing just dropped, so we're going to be talking all about what's new, what's changed, why you should care about Tailwind 4. But let me tell you what you should also care about, Sentry.io. It's the perfect place to really ship excellent applications because, let me tell you, there's so many tools within Sentry for finding either bugs, issues, slowdowns, all that stuff with your site. And there's no better place to do it than Sentry because through Sentry's UI, you can quickly solve bugs. And there's some really awesome fix-it-for-me AI tools that are coming to Sentry as well. So check it out at sentry.io/syntax. Sign up and get 2 months for free. Use the coupon code TASTYTREAT to get those 2 months, by the way.
Sweet.
Yeah, sweet indeed. Speaking of sweet, let's talk about Tailwind 4, because this thing just dropped, and there's a number of improvements, quality of life changes, and a lot of these things are definitely things that I personally am excited to see arrive. So I guess maybe like the big picture view of this is that Tailwind 4 has a smaller engine, it has faster build times, and it has more modern CSS features. And there's some other little things here and there too, but big picture, that's it.
Yeah, I think people who are using Tailwind, they're going to be excited about different things. A bunch of people listening are going to be really excited that the modern CSS has been added.
Yes.
So things like CSS layers, container queries, color mix, popover, all of these like new CSS things that we've been talking about over the last year or year and a half on this podcast are mostly now available in Tailwind via the ways that they have implemented them. And then other people are going to be excited about like the performance improvements, right? You have a massive application that has, I don't know, 20,000 JSX files, and you need to scan all of those files to figure out which classes are in there, and if they're dynamic or computed classes, you got to be able to figure all that out. So that improvement is going to be exciting for a lot of people. And then other people are just going to be excited about a lot of the new like syntax upgrades, just easier ways to approach writing Tailwind. Things that maybe were a little bit of a struggle previously are now much nicer. So let's get on into it. The first thing we have here is the new config file.
Actually, Wes, before we do get on into it, what is your favorite addition here?
So I've been using it for about 6 months now, and I've been like on all the betas and kind of moving up on through it. And the pieces that I have liked the most are the first class support for CSS variables, because what I was doing previously is if you set a variable in Tailwind 3, you set it in like a JavaScript file, and then that exposed it via like a Tailwind variable. And then like I also needed those variables available via like regular CSS custom properties, because I was using them in like calculation, relative color. I was using them in color mix. I was using them on inline styles. I was passing them to JavaScript functions.
Jeez, yeah.
And I had to like write this like little layer that would essentially just loop over all of my Tailwind variables and then stick them on the root of the document as like regular CSS custom properties. And that's no longer needed with Tailwind 4, because you now simply just define your settings as CSS custom properties, and they're available to you both via the Tailwind approach, but also available just regular CSS custom properties. So that's probably the biggest one. I also have been using the container query support quite a bit, which I'm a big fan of the syntax and kind of how it simplifies a bit of a tough syntax and spec. So probably those two.
Nice. Yeah, I don't use Tailwind personally, but one of the reasons why I don't use it is because you do have to step outside of Tailwind for things like container queries. So for me, I'm pretty stoked to see that that's part of it now. And I actually did really like the syntax when I looked into what the new container query syntax for Tailwind actually was. So I'm stoked to see those additions. I didn't know that thing about the CSS variables before, but that sounds like quite a bit of an improvement.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it was always kind of funky. And also, like, while we're talking about the CSS variables, is the syntax for using them is a little bit nicer. So previously it used to be like fill dash square brackets var dash dash the name of it, and it was just like writing CSS variables in CSS is quite enough,
Yeah.
and then writing them inline is pretty tricky. So the new syntax does away with needing to wrap it in dash dash or in writing it in var, and you simply just use dash dash, the name of your CSS variable. And that's good. And also, while we're talking about CSS variables, they also have the ability to use CSS custom property. What's it called when you register it so that you can use it to animate?
Oh, at property.
Yes, at property. And I don't know. Do you want to give a shot of explaining what at property is for?
Yeah, at property is basically a way you're defining a variable with more information, such as what type the value is it a number, is it a string, etc., and default values, those types of things. The reason why that's important is because if you're strictly defining this as a number, then CSS can interpolate between numbers without having to guess, is it a string, a number, whatever. And therefore, like the biggest, most common use case people say is that it allows for animating gradients, which is something you can't do without it.
Yes, yeah, animating gradients, animating a variable that is like a rotation degree. Mm-hmm. So if you have like a variable that is set to 0 degrees and then you update that variable to like 50 degrees, animating between those two wasn't possible previously because the browser didn't know what that type was. It didn't know that it was a degree value. So now you can register the variable as a degree value or as a custom length, mm-hmm. and then the browser will know, I understand what that is. I can tween between those two things.
Yeah, it's actually part of the CSS Houdini API. So Houdini, something that slowly been making its way into the browser here and there.
Mm-hmm. So we also have a new config. I talked about it previously. The old config was in JavaScript, and if you wanted to define custom variables, you wanted to define some like custom utility classes, you always had to like duck out and then go into your JavaScript file, which felt a little bit odd. Now you simply, your config is CSS. So in the same spot that you would stick little utility functions that are not part of Tailwind or maybe custom keyframes, things like that, you also stick your Tailwind config. And in there, you can do things like overwrite the colors, add custom colors, change the scaling of things. Anything you would normally add or overwrite in Tailwind is now done in CSS, which just feels right. Mm-hmm. It feels how it should be. And then you simply just import Tailwind into your CSS and you're up and running. There's no JavaScript config that's needed.
Yeah. So another big part of this is that it's using something called Tailwind Oxide. Oxide is really using Lightning CSS to simplify how the whole tool chain is working. It also makes it considerably faster. Lightning CSS is one of those projects that you predicted a little while ago is going to really take over as far as CSS parsing, transforming, bundling, minifying, those types of things. It is fast. It is very fast. They even have the benchmark bars to prove it on their website. But in general, it's just going to simplify the amount of things you need to install, the setup for Tailwind in general, which was also kind of a turnoff for some people, more complicated setup. So overall, also, what is it? Lightning's built in Rust. So, hey, It's fast, right?
It works well. And there's also like a first-class Vite plugin now as well. So if you're just using Vite or you're using any like popular frameworks, they just have integration built in with it. You don't have to fuss with the post CSS. As much as I love post CSS, I can never figure out the like 70 different ways to define a post CSS config.
Oh, gosh,
Like it's almost too flexible, and there's so many different ways to define things and import things, and then you don't know if it should be common.js or if you can import it and just So it's nice that it's just tucked away into a nice little Vite plugin.
Yeah, you know what? I've been considering writing a this is so dumb, but considering writing a transform of my own in Lightning to do you can write Lightning plugins pretty easily in terms of like custom transforms. I just have like an envision of like a Sass like CSS syntax that like compiles to using modern stuff, right? So you could use like Sass variables, but it would actually change them into normal CSS variables,
like
that type
dollar
of thing.
sign?
Yeah, but then also like mixins would be pretty trivial to implement. So you could get like some of that stuff just in there without having to install a bunch of post CSS plugins.
That seems like something you'll probably regret in 3 years.
That's
This
exactly
weird
why I
custom
said it's
syntax
silly.
that you invented. Yeah. But
Oh yeah.
hell
Totally.
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, right. I know. It would be more or less an exercise, not necessarily a serious project.
Yeah. By default, the colors in Tailwind 4 are using the P3 color space. Is it color space? Is that what it's called?
It's a color space, yeah. It's a color space. And basically, for people who don't know about P3 and other color spaces, the amount of colors that our monitor and even browser can display, right, before P3 were kind of inherently limited. And once you have P3 colors, if both your browser and the screen support it, those colors will be just tremendously more vivid, brighter, nicer looking. So if you aren't using P3 color, it's really easy to implement a fallback for P3 color. So even if you're not using Tailwind, P3 color is something worth learning because the colors really, really pop on it. Although you do have to be careful about the browser support. I was doing a demo during one of my talks, and then the projector didn't support P3 colors. I was like, oh, of course I should have taken I should have realized it's like working fine on my computer, right? Obviously.
Oh, that's hilarious. I didn't even think about that, but that makes so much sense that in order to enjoy P3 color palettes, you have to have a device that is capable of showing P3 color palettes. And like Scott says, that'll give you much more of a wider selection of colors, but then also things like gradients as well are better, vivid, have more of a color span. How would you describe that?
It's just wider. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know how color works, but they found some new ones, and now they're in P3.
Well, these colors were found. They were able to display new ones. We have better displays. Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. The dynamic utilities and variants. So in Tailwind, when you want to do something that is not built into Tailwind, use like the square brackets, right? And that is, you can just generate it on demand. So I'll actually use that quite a bit because like, for example, like I don't want to figure out what the rems are. I just want to figure out like 10 pixels or 20 pixels. So I'll often do like padding dash square bracket 10 pixels. And especially if there's like something that's not available inside of the Tailwind defaults. I don't necessarily want to overwrite the defaults, but I want something that's in between the options, or CSS grid columns. If there's not if you want a specific number of grid columns and it's not available as a utility class, then you use a square bracket. So now a lot more of the dynamic ones don't need that square bracket, where you can just say grid columns dash a number and it will just generate that on the fly for you. And then the same with like data attributes. So data attributes is a great way to hold state in HTML. If something is on or off, or is loading, or is a specific state of a grid, you previously would use like data dash and then square brackets and say when this element has a data attribute of loaded, then apply these following styles, right? Similar to like a media query or something like that. So now you can simply just use data dash loaded or data dash whatever data attribute that you want, and it will again pick that up, which is great. Like the square bracket syntax looks a little bit funky, and now with those things being sort of integrated first party is much nicer. I do wish you could group multiple ones. This is not just a dynamic variant one, but this is just sometimes you want to apply 3 or 4 styles when something is in a specific state, and you have to prefix each of those with the with the data dash loaded or with the MD colon or with the container query prefix. And I find that to be a bit of a pain. I wish there was I don't know what the syntax would be, but I wish there was some way to just group a whole bunch of them together. I know you can stick it in a variable and then interpolate it like that, but I'm not a huge fan of that.
There's a truck out back and the dog's freaking out. I went to go let my dog inside and the battery on my smart lock is dead. So the door wouldn't open.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I have a key,
get it
but
drilled
it's
out again?
a key for the front door, not the back door. So I'm like, whatever, I'll deal with it later.
Oh, man.
Yeah, sorry about that.
The container queries, we talked about that briefly, but the way that it works is you use @container on your container. Generally your parent. And then you can also name them by putting a slash, which I'm a big fan of that syntax, right? Like you have a div, you pop a @container /podcast card on there, and now you can reference that container in any of your child classes. And there's a set of like small, medium, large, extra small, extra large, etc., all the way from 3XS all the way to 7XL, and that will just give you different variants. What there isn't is any like utilities for using the container query units. So with container queries, you get CQW, CQH, which is 100 CQWs is equivalent to 100% width of the container. And that's really nice for resizing fonts or
great.
Setting something to be a specific size of the container when it's not a direct parent. And then there's CQI and CQD, which is inline or B, inline, which is width, and block, which is height, unless you switch them, which is a whole thing. There's no utilities for using them. And quite honestly, I don't know what the utilities would be for making that easier, but you simply just use the square bracket syntax to generate them on demand. There's support for starting style, which is really exciting. You want to give a shot at explaining what starting style is, Scott?
Yeah, I didn't realize this was part of this, so that's really exciting. I didn't see this in the blog post. Interesting. So starting style allows you to essentially style the thing before it enters the DOM. In the past, what we've done with this type of thing is you're applying a class to something when it enters the DOM, and then after a certain amount of time, you're removing that class and adding another class. This was done with
like a
React.
1 millisecond. So
Correct.
You can simply, if you want to like grow something from 10 pixels wide to 100 pixels wide, you need that initial starting style to animate it, right?
This was often done with like React Transition Group, right? Or even like the original Angular animation library handled it this way too. First as a class, it's like entering, entered, exiting, exited, or whatever those classes are, allowing you to have like a smooth transition when something enters the DOM.
So the starting style support is simply just tag starting : to the front of your selectors, and then those, similar to how styles apply at a specific media query breakpoint or a container query breakpoint, these styles will simply just apply in that state. And I kind of like that, like state-based thinking about CSS, because like you have loading or not loading, you have breakpoints, you have starting style, you have open with popover. That's another thing they have support for now. If the popover is currently open, you just type open : which quite honestly, that's a better syntax than some of the crazy starting style, allow discrete, popover, all those things, which is kind of a bit of a funky syntax.
Yeah, I do love the embrace of these new CSS things. Obviously, you could always exit into CSS within while using Tailwind anyways, but it's nice to see these things drop, because again, that was one of the things that I had against Tailwind, was always like, well, if I want to use the new stuff, I'm writing CSS anyways, and I'm having to bail out of it. So happy to see this stuff pop in.
I still will duck out in my Tailwind projects to inline styles anytime I need to do anything remotely complex. So like a complex CSS grid layout, I'm not going to start writing underscores in Tailwind because to like grid calls, angle bracket, 1FR underscore, like that syntax to me is not ideal. And when that's the case, I will simply just write alongside the style attribute or the class name attribute of my element. I'll just do an inline style block, and then I'll write my styles as inline. In my case, I'm using React, so I write it as a style object, and that's a little bit more ergonomic to me.
Interesting.
Descendant selector. If you do want to select all children of an element, which you probably shouldn't be doing, but of course, with all caveats, there are situations where you'll need it. The ** selector will allow you to select everything on a parent and go and grab the children, which is not something you can do with inline styles. You can do it with scope styles now, with a style tag inside of an element, but not something you could do with a straight up inline style.
Yeah, there's some interesting demos of this in action. I guess I don't understand why you wouldn't just write, I don't want to say normal CSS, because the last time I said a real or normal CSS in regards to Tailwind, I had a lot of people angry at me. So I don't understand why you would use this syntax, but it exists. So
I think it's because if you are writing your entire app in Tailwind, and then there are these couple little situations where you have to dip out. First of all, you can dip out with an inline style, like I just said, but with the case of selecting all children, you can't do that with an inline style. So that now you have two dip outs. You got to go to like a CSS file somewhere and start writing it. And then, then it gets a little bit hard to track. And so where is this thing? The whole benefit to a lot of people of Tailwind is not having a second place where your styles are being applied.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of more little updates and whatnot to Tailwind. It was a massive effort by the Tailwind team, so congrats to them for shipping it. Those are sort of my favorites, and I think the important ones that have come out. Still no support for text shadow, which they have said it's just too hard to come up with a utility for text shadow. I kind of wish they would just ship 6 or 7 kind of default
ones.
Text shadows.
Yeah, that seems odd to me. Yeah, I honestly, I have not looked into the problem at all, so it's easy for me to say what an easy problem to solve.
Yeah,
not have any context for why they haven't done it. So
because a text shadow has a X, a Y, a spread, and a color, right? And having a utility to apply all of those at once.
Sure.
But the little ridge, a slightly black ridge, I think that it'd be nice. But of course, you can add those utilities yourself. I add tons of utilities myself to my projects because I find them to be handy. Yeah, but that's all we got here. Check it out. Download Tailwind 4. There is a migration tool that will help you. That was quite honestly one of the biggest projects for them for moving up to Tailwind 4 was just figuring out what are all the little weird ways that people are using Tailwind, and how do we not break these totally bizarre implementations of things that people have done?
Totally.
There's just all kinds of funky stuff. I moved over from 3 to 4. Most of it transferred. The only thing was I probably had 80 lines of custom Tailwind JavaScript for all of that variable stuff and whatnot. And I actually just deleted it all and just moved it to regular CSS variables. So quite a bit of the customization just went away when I was able to just move it to CSS. So I highly recommend seeing what the migration would look like for you.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to, not migrate, I'm going to have to learn Tailwind here because if you've watched one of our new videos that are coming out on Friday, you know that I badly lost a game. So if you want to check this out, we did a guessing game with Wes, CJ, and I where it was a bunch of trivia, and let me tell you, I bombed hard, and I bombed so hard that now I have to build something in Tailwind as a punishment. So I'll be working at Tailwind quite a bit, I guess, now to fulfill my end of the deal here. Well, but if you want to check that out, we'll link that video.
You'll enjoy 4, I think. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. But definitely check that out on YouTube. YouTube.com/syntaxfm.
And also, we're going to be doing new shows like this every single Friday. So Friday on YouTube, Wes, CJ, and I have been doing some really fun stuff, including that game show, overrated or underrated, and other shows and other overrated, underrated, those types of things. It's been actually a lot of fun. So check that out.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Catch you later. Peace.
Peace.